Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Rotoworld Football Show, where today, Denny Carter and I am Patrick Daugherty, will be previewing the AFC West with the help of Chiefs analyst Pete Sweeney and ABC Denver's Troy Renck. Pete is going to join us right here off the jump. Well, Troy will be around in 40 or so minutes. And Pete, we would be remiss if we didn't welcome in someone to talk about the Kansas City Chiefs and then not immediately ask about Kadarius Toney, the only player who matters in fantasy football and frankly real football. Someone who gets talked about a lot compared to his real life accomplishments so far, but it's because everyone can see the really rare athleticism, the really rare football ability he has. But he was already one of fantasy football's most polarizing players before training camp started. Now he already has a knee tweak, whatever that means. How serious are you hearing the injury might be? You might not have any information on that. And if he is healthy, what realistically will Toney's role be in week one?
Yeah, this is the point that we're all watching, along with the Chris Jones. Will he show up? Will he not show up on the other side? But you start first full team practice yesterday on Sunday, and within 10 minutes, the caveat rears its ugly head of, man, Toney is so talented, but when is he going to be available? And took him right off the field. He was shagging punts, and apparently something happened with his knee. They wanted to back off. Seems like there were some tests done overnight. The media received a message today that there would be more information provided by Andy Reid on Tuesday. So we should have a little bit more clarity. But then what was interesting was Travis Kelce was asked about what the Chiefs will miss with Toney shortly following the practice. And he kind of hinted at the fact that maybe this isn't a day-to-day thing, but maybe a week-to-week thing. And from poking around and things that I have heard, I think this is something that might cost him a couple of weeks, but there is optimism that by the time the regular season starts, 40-plus days from now, he's all right. But I think you have to think about the idea of now, let's say the timeline is 3-4 weeks. Let's say it is all of training camp. The Chiefs are preparing to play this entire campaign, and they have to do so now without Kadarius Toney. And with the mystery surrounding Toney, don't you start to build maybe your game plan a little bit more leaning into the Travis Kelce's, the Noah Grays of the world? You start to lean into maybe a little bit of Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Sky Moore. From a fantasy perspective, it's suddenly Rashee Rice, the rookie, relevant in Kansas City because they are pivoting in a way where maybe it was going to be Toney centric and maybe you have to do other things now. So it remains something to monitor, but I think my messaging, what I feel about the situation is this isn't a day-to-day thing like we might have thought yesterday. This feels much more like a week-to-week, let's see type of thing, which is never the words you want to see when you're talking about fantasy football.
Yeah, Pete, we talked a lot about Kadarius Toney on this show this offseason because he's so tantalizing from a fantasy standpoint. He's so productive on a per snap and per route basis. And I'm sure you know this. If he is fully healthy to start the season, can we bank on him having a full complement of snaps in this offense? I know in the Super Bowl, I think he got nine snaps, and he did well in those 9 snaps. But are we still talking about a part-time player, or is he a full-time player?
Well, this is the typical strategy that you'll see from Andy Reid with returning players is when they're first coming back into the lineup, they don't bank necessarily on the player getting through a full game. If you go back and look to the snap counts of Juju Smith-Schuster when he was coming back from that concussion last year, he eased him in, and he tends to do that with all injuries. So let's try to use a hypothetical and say Toney misses a couple weeks, 3-4 weeks, and is ready just in time for week one. I don't know if he's going to get that full 100% amount of snaps that he would have gotten had he had, let's say, a healthy training camp. Now you get to 2 or 3 weeks and he's healthy and the Chiefs feel like they can rely on him even more, then he starts becoming a much bigger part of the game plan. The Chiefs in a sneaky way use snap counts more so than they like to let on, especially dealing with players coming off of injury. And I think you see that in this case.
We need to stop talking about Kadarius Toney, but that's all we ever want to talk about. I mean, is there a sense that the Chiefs will just never trust this guy as like a full-time player and are going to view him more as like a packages type player and almost like contributions are a bonus type player?
Yeah, I think they want to. I think they want him to be the number 1 receiver. This is something that they've leaned into all offseason. You've seen reports floated out that this is going to be Kadarius Toney's year to go from that role play gadget type, one play a game type guy to someone you can rely on. And it's always with the, well, if he's healthy. And you try to be careful with that. I try to be careful with that as a Chiefs writer, as a writer in the NFL, about labeling a player as injury prone, especially young, because when they're young, sometimes unluckiness happens and they've only had 2 opportunities, maybe 2 seasons, and they got injured both seasons and suddenly they're injury prone. But players can get into their 3rd season and then not be injured for several years, and then suddenly that stigma goes away. But with Toney, it's just hard to avoid, because now you're here in the 3rd season. He had injury problems his 1st year, injury problems his 2nd year, and it's crazy. Not even 10 minutes into the workout, he's injured again. So I think if he can be healthy, which he unfortunately, again, he has not proven to this point, I think the Chiefs want him to be that. But until he shows that he can, last a month or 2, durable in the NFL, and you get 8 games started or appearances in his stat column, it's just hard for that, I think, anyone to feel like they can lean into him as this reliable guy that they can count on.
Pete, you already mentioned some of these other names, but beyond Toney, the Chiefs receivers fantasy managers want to know about are 2nd-year pro Sky Moore, 2nd-round rookie Rashee Rice. We know all about Moore's shaky rookie year, and then kind of a little bit of Super Bowl redemption, really strong offseason reviews from the coaching staff, from the Chiefs media too. How has Sky Moore looked? What do you believe his upside is? Would you call him like the number 2 receiver in this offense, knowing that Marquez Valdes-Scantling is like a starting receiver, but kind of like a role player, even though he's out there so much? Just give us the lowdown on Sky Moore heading into 2023.
Yeah, I'll start quickly with that Marquez Valdes-Scantling point. I think when Marquez first arrived in Kansas City, the storyline surrounding him was like, well, Green Bay used him more to stretch the field. He's going to be this all-around receiver here in KC. And it never really came to fruition. He was more of that guy who stretches the field in Kansas City. And we ran this on arrowheadpride.com. We've been offering questions out to the fan base, and we'll answer them and then let people answer in the comments. Who leads the wide receiver room? So take Travis Kelce out of it. Who leads the wide receiver room in yardage this year? My answer was Sky Moore, and this was before Toney got hurt. I didn't trust Toney to play more than 13 and a half games if you're trying to play the over-under game, and so that's 4 less opportunities for Toney to beat Moore in yardage. And I tend to like MVS is more of that guy who stretches the field. What does that lead you to? It leads you to Sky Moore, who I think can maybe counteract Travis Kelce as that other option on the other side of these formations, where he is showing off that elite release off the line of scrimmage on these quick routes and really live as like this slot guy for Patrick Mahomes when maybe Travis Kelce is getting doubled or bracketed and has too much attention. Sky Moore, I think, is going to be that guy, that chain mover. And I wouldn't be surprised if Sky Moore, under the radar, leads the Chiefs receivers in yardage this year because of the Toney injury question, not being able to play a full bevy of games. Because I think Marquez Valdes-Scantling kind of will live always in that 600 to 800 range, where the most impressive part about his game is the yards per reception, because usually it's like 17 or 18, where Sky Moore, to me, I think, especially in the 2nd year, is going to get that volume.
Do you think Moore profiles as the full-time slot receiver? Because obviously Juju's gone. Last year, just looking at Sky Moore's numbers, the only real success he had was actually out of the slot, and he seemed to be very good from the slot and targeted pretty often from the slot. So do you think that's where he'll be, or do you think he'll be moved around formation?
Well, Andy Reid, including the tight ends and the running backs, likes to move everybody all over the line. And so I know what you're saying, where he did have more of the success outside, but I just tend to think the Chiefs have other options where Kadarius is healthy. You have MVS. Rashee Rice is the rookie who's, I think, a little bit profiles more so as an outside guy, where I think you lose Juju, so someone has to fill that void. And I think they're challenging Sky Moore to do that, where he can become that go-to target when Kelce has a little bit more attention than he might not have on other plays. And I just think you look at the hands, you look at, I think, the speed after the catch with Sky Moore. To me, I'm probably bullish most on him in the wide receiver room for this year. And it might be Rice with other head coaches, but we have seen that it usually takes a year for a rookie to really get acclimated in the Andy Reid system. I like Rashee Rice and a Jody Fortson more so in the red zone than I do for a complete fantasy player with production.
Pete, Denny's going to ask you about the running backs. Just one more receiver question. It is in such an unsettled group. fantasy managers kind of start getting excited about the guys on the periphery, just looking for upside wherever they might find it, especially with Patrick Mahomes, maybe already, I'm going to say maybe the greatest player in NFL history at quarterback. And Chiefs players are talking about Richie James. Fantasy managers talk about Justin Ross. Is there anything to either one of those? Or are they just more, they're going to be role players. They might get on the field, but it's not going to translate to box score production.
I think the Chiefs believe in all these players. Like I think they feel like Justin Ross is somebody, again, he has the Toney thing where if he's able to stay healthy, they feel like they might have got one with Justin Ross. When it comes to the running backs, I kind of see this year being, once again, Isiah Pacheco and Jerick McKinnon as that 1-2. Jerick McKinnon is the best pass blocker in that room. And what I think the Chiefs see right now is Deneric Prince, who they brought in as an undrafted free agent out of Tulsa. If you're at camp, I'm on the campus right now, Deneric Prince is not dropping a pass. The problem that you're going to run into is you can catch all the balls in the world. If you can't pass protect Patrick Mahomes, that is going to prevent the Chiefs from putting him in right away. So I think this is a learning year for Deneric Prince. He's going to be the kick returner on this team, learn from Jerick McKinnon. So it's Pacheco and McKinnon. By the way, I think Pacheco will be good to go week 1. I know there had been some questions about that, but Pacheco and then McKinnon. McKinnon takes Prince under his wing. Maybe next year, in some of those dynasty leagues, it is Pacheco and Prince, where McKinnon's 31. I can see this maybe being his last year, him being with another team. And then Clyde is your change of pace back this year. I actually think Clyde gets more touches than people want to realize right now, but I do think it is more of a change of pace back, a guy that is going to come in if one of the top 2 were to get injured. But I think he'll be on this team as well. Again, next year, maybe McKinnon and Clyde are elsewhere, and it's more so Pacheco and Prince.
You're right, Pete, in that we as fantasy managers do not want to acknowledge that CEH could be a factor in this backfield. No. We would rather it be a little more simple with Pacheco and then McKinnon as the pass catcher. Now, the key for upside for Pacheco this year is, especially in PPR formats, is the pass catching. And he really didn't run a lot of routes last year, really wasn't involved as a pass catcher, as good as he was as a rusher, especially late in the season. Is there any path to him getting more targets, or is that just kind of locked down by McKinnon or whoever, CEH or whoever would take on that pass catching role?
Well, in talking to him, he wants to see more targets in the pass game. I mean, if it was up to Isiah Pacheco, he would be on the field for every single play. I mean, that is his mentality. And he came into his own, I think, a little bit in the pass game at the end of last year. It's due the Chiefs trust him as a pass protector. Right now, he's wearing a yellow jersey at camp. So when they start these drills where, they'll go a linebacker versus a running back, to try to get to the cone, the pass blocking drills. I don't know if Pacheco is going to be able to participate until later on in camp. He's got to prove that part of his game before the Chiefs, I think, lean into him as an every single down back. Until then, you're going to see Jerick McKinnon, who really shined last year at the end of last season, I think, be that guy on third down. But it's developing. It's hard for me to expect that at the beginning of the year.
Pete, was there anything to the Chiefs waiting so long to re-sign McKinnon, or was that just kind of salary cap games? Was there already kind of like a handshake agreement there? Because fantasy managers were trying to cling to, they let Jerick McKinnon sit on the open market for 2 months, or is that just more kind of a formality?
In talking to McKinnon when he came back, you got the sense that it was was Kansas City type of deal. I wouldn't read into it that much. It came late last year. I mean, when these guys get to be in their late 20s and early 30s, what you start to see is them just making sure that they consider all options. And so I think you saw that from McKinnon. He wanted to see what's out there. If you ask Kareem Hunt or Leonard Fournette or Dalvin Cook, they'll tell you not much. And so I think he thought the best scenario for him was to come back in Kansas City, where he really thrived. I mean, he had one of the better years of his career, if not the best year of his career, especially when it came to those touchdowns. And so why not run it back with Kansas City, continue to mentor these guys? I'm not sure how much longer he plays. He's got an amazing story, missed 2 years and somehow was able to still be productive after that. And I think he's happy here in Kansas City, and I think he's going to have a real role.
Pete, we know you got to get out of here, but just anyone that we did not mention that you think needs to be mentioned. You couldn't help but notice you mentioned Noah Gray. Is there any players we did not get to that you think are worth a mention?
I think that that might be the biggest under the radar fantasy player, maybe potentially for Kansas City, is Noah Gray this year, because I think everybody wants to look at the wide receivers and say, okay, which one of these guys is going to replace Juju Smith-Schuster? I think hidden in that is what Noah Gray did, especially toward the end of last year. It really has the trust of Patrick Mahomes. If you look at the stats and go through all of last year, every regular season and every playoff game, Noah Gray has at least one target. I tend to think that that is going to increase in 2023. And Andy Reid always adapts to the players that he has. So let's say, okay, now Kadarius Toney is down. He was supposed to be the number one wide receiver. People had questions about that even when he was healthy. Could Sky Moore be that in the second year? Like, who's going to be that option after Travis Kelce? What Andy Reid will do is like say, okay, we're going to run 21 and just have two tight ends on the field and say, okay, Noah Gray is going to be that guy for us. And he shows it. I mean, he catches everything that is thrown to him by Patrick Mahomes. Mahomes trusts him in big spots. Andy Reid has been itching to, I think, use multiple tight ends for a couple of years now. And I just think it's one of these guys that could be interesting, especially if the Chiefs in certain games and maybe for big chunks of games during the year go a little bit heavier with the two tight ends, leaning on Pacheco and using the receivers more to stretch the field and dink and dunk in a way more so than that flashy Chiefs offense that you're used to. All they care, like, we care about points and yardage.
We do.
All they care about is winning these games. And I think there is a theory that Andy Reid could lean into the tight ends more so than receivers.
So what you're saying, P, is Noah Gray over Travis Kelce. I get.
Let's put on record that no, certainly not. Obviously, continue to take Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes are quite obviously the two safest fantasy options. But if you're reaching, I think Gray's a fair dart to throw late in the game.
Yeah, good stuff.
I don't know what happened to Chiefs culture. All they care about is winning. Win with style. It doesn't matter if it's not with style.
That's right.
Pete, we'll let you get out of here. I know you got to get to your media availability. You are at PG Sween on what used to be called Twitter. I don't know. Where
X gonna give it to you. Yeah, that's
right. But where can everyone find you? I mean, I know you from Arrowhead Pride, but it seems like you're all over the place these days.
Yeah. Arrowheadpride.com is where you can find our Chiefs coverage. I do stuff for 610 Sports Radio locally in Kansas City, which you can get online. NBC locally, KSHB, which you can get online. Arrowhead Pride in my Twitter or X. /PG Sween is the best place to find most of that stuff. I usually will repost anywhere that I pop up. So I appreciate you guys having me on. I hope you guys learned something from Chiefs Camp here.
We did a few things we didn't want to learn, but that's fine. So
thanks, Pete.
Pete, thank you so much for taking the time. You can get back to work now. Denny and I can get back to clowning around, and me just sitting on the edge of the seat wondering about if my internet is fast enough. I'm
sweating for your internet.
I'm sweating bullets over here, but
the connection is always a little bit iffy right now.
So we'll see what happens with that. And I'm sorry that I'm talking about that every show, but I know Denny, Noah Gray. I mean, that was problematic.
I don't love to hear that, but and I don't like the CEH stuff. No, thank you. No, thank you. Please just don't tell me that, Pete. But no, the Noah Gray thing makes sense. Andy Reid talks about Noah Gray like Bill Belichick talks about a third string special teamer. I mean, just with adoration for Noah Gray.
I mean, Pete he didn't directly get it. He kind of directly and indirectly got at it. Is what if the answer in the Chiefs receiver core is just nobody? And more than ever, they just play this like point guard type offense where Pat Mahomes is just distributing the ball to whoever happens to be open. There's no go-to guy. It's the sprawling committee of pass catchers, and we might not get any clean, easy answers, especially in training camp. Maybe something will develop as the season goes along. It's hard to accept when Patrick Mahomes is the quarterback,
right?
That there's not going to be guaranteed fantasy points for more than one pass catcher,
right?
The one being Travis Kelce. But it's just a crazy, uncertain
situation. I mean, I think we feel like rightfully compelled to search for the other guy. Like there has to be one other guy, right? It's got to be Toney. It's got to be Sky Moore. And we talked about Toney's injuries about, 2-3 weeks ago. And I said that because of that, and I'm not an injury prone guy. Okay. I'm not out here saying you can't draft Cooper Kupp because he got hurt one time or twice really. But I am saying that the Toney thing freaks me out at his ADP. If I can just get Sky Moore, like, I don't know what, 4 or 5 rounds later, like it's a huge gap, and that gap will narrow. So I think now, if you're doing drafts now, best ball, whatever, now is the time to seize on that and get Sky Moore.
And then it's also immediately time to seize on the mentality. Well, now Toney's just going to become a bargain.
I'm kind of out.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of out too, but then I'll be back in. And we will be
Hard not to.
We'll be right back after this. With the NFL season quickly approaching, now is the perfect time to get your Rotoworld Fantasy Football Draft Guide. Get ready for your draft and stay one step ahead of your league during the preseason with updated player rankings, profiles, projections, mock drafts, and more. Go to NBCSports.com/draft guide and use promo code DRAFT2023 to save 20% at checkout. That is NBCSports.com/draft guide with promo code DRAFT2023 to save 20% at checkout. You know who else saved 20% at checkout, Denny?
Who did?
Was the Chargers when they hired Joe Lombardi. They were going for a bargain at offensive coordinator instead of thinking forward, trying to find like the next great innovative play caller. Didn't work. Justin Herbert just dinked and dunked for 2 years, and it was not fun at all.
Yeah.
Joe Lombardi's gone. Kellen Moore is in, who ran some of the most explosive, efficient offenses in the entire NFL during his time in Dallas, despite Mike McCarthy trying to tie one hand behind his back. But yeah, it's very easy to get caught up in like narratives with play callers and coaching when it might just come down to the players. And just what can we realistically expect from this Chargers offense as they swap out Joe Lombardi for Kellen Moore?
Well, I mean, there have been several reports over the past 30 days or so saying that, you know, they're in mandatory minicamp and in other offseason practices that there's been a real focus on getting the ball downfield to their pass catchers. Now, you know, Mike Williams not really known for getting open. Quentin Johnston, kind of the same issues. But I think that any sort of offensive system that allows Justin Herbert to use his considerable arm strength, which is the maddening thing, right? I mean, we saw him dink and dunk like he was Drew Brees, like late career Drew Brees last year, and he can throw it harder than almost anyone, maybe anyone in the entire NFL. So, you know, I think more of that will be really good for, you know, his fantasy upside. He kind of showed a floor last year, but we can finally get some upside. That's the main takeaway, I think, is being able to push the ball downfield and to get maybe a few, who knows, maybe a few long touchdowns for the Chargers this year. Can we get that?
Would be really nice, especially if you play in a distance scoring league or your home league like myself. And can't wait. We'd be remiss if we didn't remind our listeners for somehow like the 10th time this offseason that Jalen Guyton is coming back.
Jalen Guyton, the key to the offense.
The key to the offense. The key to at least stretching the field and helping out his fantasy brethren, because Jalen Guyton will, of course, never be fantasy relevant. But we now have an offense with three guys with extremely impressive resumes, where you have Keenan Allen, a former first-rounder Mike Williams, now on a second contract, and you now have rookie first-rounder Quentin Johnston, but he's a first-round guy who's just a total afterthought in fantasy, basically. Yeah. Currently the wide receiver 41 on Underdog.
Right.
I bet he's lower on Fantasy Football Calculator, which, you know, kind of takes the pulse of like the more home league type drafting base. Mm-hmm. Do you think sleeping on Quentin Johnston might be a mistake? And we've gotten like a little too into the narratives. Oh, he's big and slow and maybe doesn't really play up to his size. I mean, there is a reason he's a first-round pick. What do you think about Quentin Johnston?
Exactly. No, I mean, those are all really good points. And I find myself buying into those narratives and saying, kind of writing him off. And I think that is probably going to be at least a small mistake, if not a huge mistake down the line. Look, I'm in on Justin Herbert as an upside quarterback going after the elite options, the Hurts, the Allens, the Mahomes. I'm in on him. So therefore, I feel I necessarily have to be kind of bullish on a Johnston. I have to be kind of bullish on a Gerald Everett. And I know that sounds kind of funny. I can see you think it's funny. But you know, I do think that if Herbert's going to have a big year, it's not just going to be Keenan Allen catching a bunch of 7-yard passes, you know?
No, that's a very good point. And hopefully Keenan Allen do another. It's weird because Keenan Allen is like the dink and dunk guy. And we were complaining about how much Justin Herbert dinked and dunked last year, but he could have dinked and dunked a lot more effectively the first 2/3 of the season had Keenan Allen been healthy.
Yes.
He is healthy right now. Hopefully they have a plan to somehow keep his hamstrings healthy. You know, guys always kind of have those problems, and of course, not getting any younger. I mean, Mike Williams, like there's not even a discourse around Mike Williams because it's all about Keenan Allen's health. It's all about Quentin Johnston's profile.
Right.
I mean, Mike Williams, He was it last year where he was like a wide receiver 1 for a while, or was that 2 years ago? I don't remember.
It's hard to say.
Do you have an opinion on Mike Williams?
I mean, I guess, he falls into the category of guys who I probably need to be drafting at ADP, and especially if he starts falling a little bit, even though his injury history stinks. And unfortunately, because he's a great player, he's fun to watch. And typically he's kind of volatile with the scoring because of the kind of targets he gets. He's not, Mike Williams has never really been able to smooth out that production with some short area targets that can make sure that on down days, on the days when he doesn't catch the 50-yard pass down the sideline, he can still be okay, be a wide receiver 2 or 3 for you in fantasy. So feast or famine, that's kind of been his thing. Hopefully he can smooth that over a little bit. But sure, I mean, I do think that Kellen Moore clearly knows what he has in Justin Herbert. So if you like Herbert, like me, then man, I mean, Mike Williams kind of looks like a good target.
Any other bolts pass catchers we need to be in on? You mentioned Gerald Everett.
Yeah.
And it is Gerald Everett, perennially one of the most frustrating players in the NFL because he flashes his unique playmaking ability. Then he flashes the reason why he's kind of become a journeyman, why he's never exploded in fantasy. He makes a lot of mistakes. He's not consistent. More upside with Kellen Moore, question mark, or should we just kind of give up the ghost with Gerald Everett?
I think if you are fading the elite tight ends, the Kelce's, pretty much Kelce and Andrews and Hawkinson. I mean, that's what we're talking about. And if you're not going in on Kyle Pitts at his depressed ADP, which again, I do like that, then yeah, I mean, a guy like Everett, you pick in honestly like the last round, the second to last round of your home league draft. And I think that he has as good a chance as any late round tight end of being a plug and play guy, especially if this Chargers offense is pass first, is more pass heavy. We're going to have more targets to go around. And Everett, if he's used like last year, he's going to be running a large percentage of the pass routes in this offense.
And we know when it comes to the running game that Austin Ekeler is disgruntled. We also know he's as elite as it gets in fantasy football. We're not really worried about him despite the contract situation. No. Still anything whatsoever to be excited about behind Austin Ekeler. No additions really of note. Did they sign it? I can't remember. Did they sign a guy? I wanted them to sign Damian Harris. I always think they signed Damian Harris because I wanted them to. They did not.
You tried to will that into existence.
I did try to manifest that into existence.
Did they sign Sonny Michel?
They did sign Sonny Michel. I believe maybe he's already been cut, though.
Oh well.
I'm not even kidding. Or maybe was that last year that he was on the Chargers?
I'm going to let you.
Website called I don't know. Let's see. What's Sonny Michel Wikipedia? I'm literally done.
Let's read about his high school.
Sonny Michel is on a team. Can you guess what team he's on?
Oh, it's one of the LA teams.
It is. He's on the Rams. He's on the Rams.
I mean, he always plays for an LA team.
He's back home with the Rams, and it was last year that he was on the Chargers. We love our Sonny Michel.
He'll never not play for an LA team.
We don't love our Isaiah Spiller. We don't love our Larry Roundtree, despite what he did for our Missouri Tigers. Josh Kelly's still there, but yeah, there's nothing doing behind Austin, which is crazy. Austin Ekeler, is talking about the importance of elite running backs, which can be heavily debated, of course. The Chargers keep proving the importance of having running back depth. Yeah. I think it does hurt them that they don't have a settled role, that they're always just playing musical chairs and getting like 2.1 yards per carry behind Austin Ekeler. It's a situation they've needed to figure out for a while.
It's the worst running back room in the NFL behind Austin Ekeler. I think we could say that pretty definitively. I mean, you put someone like, I don't know, Devin Singletary behind Ekeler, and it becomes like a vastly improved backfield, which is saying something. Our former colleague and good friend, Patrick Corain, believes that Uncle Leonard Fournette, is going to land with the Chargers. So we have to keep an eye on that.
What would that do to Eckler's pass catching?
Yeah.
That's kind of Lenny's thing these days.
I don't think it would be very good for Ekeler. Like when he said that, I went on his best ball live stream last week and he said it. And I said, no, I don't want to hear that. Stop with this Uncle Lenny stuff. I want Ekeler to have the whole pie, whole backfield pie. And Leonard Fournette, for as frustrating as he has been as a fantasy, producer, he also would, I think, take a chunk of that Ekeler workload.
He would. Well, we'll keep an eye on that. That would be bad.
It wouldn't be good.
We do not want someone who catches passes behind Mr. Austin Ekeler. So we'll see what happens there. We'll see what happens with the Las Vegas Raiders right after this. It's a star-studded battle this Sunday on MLB leadoff as Shohei Ohtani and the Los Angeles Angels travel north of the border to face Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and the Toronto Blue Jays. Find out if there will be fireworks at Rogers Center at 11:30 a.m. Eastern, exclusively on Peacock. That is this upcoming Sunday. I can't speak because I'm so excited about the game. I actually am. I have Shohei Ohtani in my home league. Gonna need some early homers. Sunday's always a big day, Denny.
That was, what, from my expert opinion, that was a good pick by you.
It was a good pick. Picking the guy who hits all the ding-dongs, all the taters, all the bombs.
Yes, possibly the greatest baseball player to ever play. You have him on your team, and that's good.
Possibly he's, some people think are getting a little ahead of themselves with that. But
really? Yeah.
He's the most unique, for sure.
Sure. Can I tell you something that makes me feel old, Pat? Is that Vlad Guerrero Jr. is now a grizzled veteran.
I know.
I mean,
I know. I know.
When did that happen?
I know. Vladimir Guerrero III is currently a rising prospect in the San Diego Padres system too.
But you're probably not even joking. Like I wouldn't be surprised if the Vlad Guerrero III is playing third base by next year.
Yeah, so we'll see about that. We're going to follow that very closely, very powerfully. Denny, as my internet continues to tumble, tell us about the Las Vegas Raiders. Is this going nowhere fast? And if I disappear for a second, just keep filibustering, keep talking about the Las Vegas Raiders.
I will miss you as you disappear, but I will say this about the Raiders. The quarterback situation, I said this on Twitter the other day, and the more I thought about it, the more it felt less hot-takey, which is that even with Jimmy Garoppolo at full health, which I guess he is, according to reports, is he originally was going to or did fail his physical coming to the Raiders. He seems to be okay now with the foot situation, but that quarterback room for the Raiders has to be the worst in the entire NFL. I can't think of a worse one. I racked my brain yesterday, and maybe Pat will have some thoughts in a moment here on a quarterback room that is worse, but you have Garoppolo, a banged up old Garoppolo. You have behind him some combination of Brian Hoyer, who is probably the worst quarterback in the NFL right now. Nothing against Brian Hoyer. He's 54 years old. Okay. You can't expect much. And then you have Aiden O'Connell, the rookie out of Purdue, who by many measures, and I've looked into these numbers, was among the worst starting quarterbacks in major college football in 2022. So really bad. You do have one Thomas Brady up in the owner's booth, so we have to remember that. But it can't be, it cannot be fantastic for Davante Adams. I will say this about Davante Adams is the perception is this is a bad situation, and I get that. So now you're able to get him at the top of the second round sometimes in 12-team leagues. I think there's some cushion there. And you can and probably should use that cushion to get him. It's a nice thing to be able to start your draft with, say, CeeDee Lamb and Davante Adams. And the reason I think Adams can be okay in 2023 is because we thought largely the same thing about last year. Last August we were talking about Derek Carr is the king of dinking and dunking. He's never going to throw it downfield to Davante Adams, and that's what we need for Davante Adams to really pay off his ADP, which was in the first round last summer. So no, we're all out on Davante Adams because Derek Carr. He doesn't throw it. We say the same thing now about Jimmy Garoppolo. Well, Derek Carr last year, if you look at his adjusted yards per attempt and his average depth of target, they were all, I believe, career highs for a full season from Derek Carr. And that makes me think that, those measurements, especially ADOT, are really like a wide receiver influenced metric. And so when you have a dominant downfield force like a Davante Adams, your ADOT is going to spike. So maybe we'll see the same thing with Jimmy Garoppolo. I guess the question really is, do you think Derek Carr is better than Jimmy Garoppolo, or vice versa? And if you think that Jimmy Garoppolo is an upgrade on Derek Carr, then I guess you're all in. I guess you're all in on Davante Adams in that passing attack. I kind of think, maybe Pat can chime in here, that Jimmy G is a significant downgrade from Derek Carr. I think Jimmy G has benefited from being in the most quarterback-friendly system known to mankind in San Francisco, and I don't know if he can function the same way with the Raiders. And when I say I don't know, it means I highly doubt it.
Yeah, my Javonte Adams take is he's going as the wide receiver 8 to 10, very punitive. There's Jimmy G is being priced in, but he hasn't even finished lower than he hasn't finished that low in fantasy since 2017 when he was the wide receiver 9. And it's basically like, do we think Jimmy Garoppolo is a doomsday event, or do we think he's a downgrade? Like, because I think he's gotten too cheap, basically.
Right.
And the penalty has gotten a little too prohibitive, a little too severe, and that he's basically the point where I am kind of interested in cost, where he's still the Raiders' one good idea. Like, what is their plan going to be? It's going to be just feed targets to Davante Adams. Still, even with Jakobi Meyers, even with Hunter Renfrow somehow still on the team, I think it's gotten a little carried away, the hate with Davante. I don't know. I don't know if I'm actually have the courage to draft him though, in like season-long teams I'm managing all year.
I struggle. I really do struggle to go in on Adams. But like I said, if you're getting him in the second round, it is hard. It's hard to look away from a guy who, if he plays a full season, Davante Adams is going to get 170 targets in that offense. There is I feel like looming over the entire Raiders situation is like total catastrophe. Is like McDaniel's getting fired, like huge shakeups in the front office or wherever. Because this is a bad team and a bad organization, terrible organization. The Raiders will never be good. Okay. I'm sorry to Raiders fans. Your Raiders will never be good for as long as they have this ownership. So, that could affect Davante Adams. That sort of dysfunction could affect him.
All that's hanging over Josh Jacobs too, who is only has one option. It's either sign his franchise tag and play this year, or hold out and not get paid, because a long-term deal cannot be agreed to at this point. July 18th or whatever was the deadline. So that cake is baked. The best guess is that Josh Jacobs skips most of camp, reports late, probably does play week 1, maybe misses week 1, misses one game check. He's a guy who, again, has been faded, I feel like, way too far in fantasy. If we knew he had a normal situation, if he was already there practicing, how worried do we really need to be about missing some of training camp?
Yeah,
that kind of thing.
I'm not worried. I mean, it was reported today that, like Nick Cage, folks, he was leaving Las Vegas. All right. I know the Zoomers will get that reference. But in a better mental state than Nick Cage in that movie. So I'm drafting Zamir White, the RB2 for Vegas, and kind of monitoring very closely this situation. Josh Jacobs, to me, seems everything he has said and done through the past 3 or 4 weeks has said that he means business. And I feel like with Saquon Barkley, you could maybe say the same thing, but Saquon always sort of buffers what he says. And is it, well, I could do this, but I probably won't. But Josh Jacobs, I feel like the probably won't is not quite there yet. So we could see him miss time, I think.
Good. And I mean, is it still like a value opportunity? Everyone's scared, Josh Jacobs. And anecdotally, we know holdouts, it seems to have poor years. I'm sure there have been some studies done on this, but yeah, I mean, could he become just the worry goes too far, as it always does. Worry never seems to go just far enough in fantasy. It always seems to go too far. Will Josh Jacobs ever be a value for you, Denny?
I mean, I get it. I get the fear, okay? The blood in the water, all right? Because you don't want to spend a 3rd or 4th round pick on a guy who's not going to play. I mean, that's a a monster hole in your roster. Like, I don't really know if you can recover from that unless you also get Zamir White, and Zamir White is incredible for a horrible Raiders team. I guess that would be the way you would save that situation. But yeah, I think there's probably a good chance, Pat, that the fear around Josh Jacobs will go too far and people will get great value on him before some sort of a deal is worked out. You know, I mean, some agreement is made so that he gets back on the field, back on the practice field, hopefully on the field for week 1.
It's such a tricky situation because they can't do an extension at this point.
They can't.
I feel like the NFL really needs to change that rule, by the way.
they really do.
Like,
yeah.
Why is that the franchise tag rule? It doesn't really make any sense at all. But I know you're not like Crane when it comes to drafting best ball teams. Do you have any Josh Jacobs in best ball or no?
No, yeah, I'm not a high volume best ball drafter, but I've done, I don't know, I've probably done 15 to 20 somewhere in there. And I do not have Josh Jacobs anywhere. And that it doesn't have to do with me like writing him off as an option. I guess it just has to do with the wide receiver avalanche, as the Zoomers are calling it on Underdog, and being afraid of getting buried under that avalanche. So, you know, therefore passing by Josh Jacobs. But things will be very different when you're drafting in your casual league, depending on the contract situation. And you could get a great value on Jacobs.
Anyone else? Do we care about any single other skill player in this team? I mean, got interesting. I mean, Jakobi Meyers is a fantasy viable player, or at least he should be. Like, he feels so redundant with Davante Adams. I mean, what's even going to happen if Hunter Renfrow remains on this team? The rookie Mayer at tight end, almost a first-round pick. Who else, if anyone, do we care about behind Davante Adams and Josh Jacobs?
I mean, I really like the way that Hunter Renfrow fits in this offense, the system, and also with Jimmy Garoppolo, who, you know, loves the check down. You know, we know that about old Jimmy G. And by the way, Jimmy G with like a head full of gray hair is freaking me out, man. Like 18 months ago, he looked as young as any quarterback in the league, and now he looks like his own father. So, you know, Jimmy G, you're freaking me out.
I believe that's called Signs with the Raiders once.
And now he has silver and black hair. It's weird. I will say. But the Athletics' Tashawn Reed reported recently that the team has not received any trade offers for Hunter Renfrow, not even from the Giants, who certainly love their slot receivers. But that, you know, there is the idea, I guess, floating out there that they could just part ways with Renfrow in the coming weeks. So I guess if you're drafting him hoping that he's a dump off option for Jimmy Garoppolo, I guess maybe that doesn't work out. Who does that leave? I guess Jakobi Meyers.
Do you have any interest in Michael Mayer, the number 35 overall pick? Like you said, essentially a first rounder. I mean, Josh McDaniels has a lot of experience with offenses that heavily target the tight end. It was Hall of Fame type talents for a lot of years in New England. But I mean, any interest in Michael Mayer? Or is this dysfunctional situation? Are we looking for reasons to stay away rather than reasons to get in?
No, I mean, especially like, as you know, you can get Michael Mayer for I don't know, a last round pick right now in most leagues. You know, interestingly, the Raiders list Mayer as the tight end 2 on their depth chart behind the immortal and eternal Austin Hooper. So we do have to kind of keep an eye on that a little bit. There's, you know, OJ Howard's in there. I know. Everybody would roll their eyes at that, but really, I mean, Mayer could be competing for snaps and routes in a way that we don't really want to see. So I'm a little skeptical.
Yeah, I just feel like it's really, really hard, as you've laid out, to shake the train wreck feeling here.
Yeah.
There will be no goodness in Las Vegas. And that it feels like this has been a rock bottom situation, but that there's still further to fall. So.
Oh, there's so much further to fall. Like there's like a decent chance I think the Raiders are making huge changes by mid-season just because things are falling apart. This is a really, really bad situation. Still not sure, not entirely positive what Davante Adams was thinking going from one of the most stable organizations in sports to the Raiders. So we still have to look in on that.
Yeah, I believe that was called Davante Adams gets in his feelings once, didn't he? And,
yeah, I think he got his feelings were hurt.
And he altered NFL history. I'm going to alter Rotoworld football show history, and I'm going to leave the show. Denny Carter's going to interview ABC Denver's Troy Renck. I will continue my one-man legal campaign against Charter Communications.
I wish you luck, man. All right, folks, it's just me and Troy Renck. Troy, thank you for joining us today on the Rotoworld football show. Sorry that Pat Daugherty had to drop out. His internet is not cooperating.
Yeah, I've been there. No problems. Glad to be here.
Yeah, you can find Troy at Troy Renck, R-E-N-C-K. I do have that last name right, Troy?
Yeah, you've got it pronounced right. Most don't get it right. You nailed it.
All right, I'm glad to hear that. Troy, I wanted to start just quickly with a non-fantasy football question. What are the biggest differences to you around the Broncos this offseason under head coach Sean Payton? Especially compared to how things were under Nathaniel Hackett this time last year?
Well, I think the easiest way to explain it is that last year was Sesame Street. This year is Compete Street. Right. There's actually a sign that says Compete Street that Sean Payton had installed in the sidewalk as you walk out of the locker room. Last year was chaotic. Listen, Hackett had a caffeinated personality. We wanted the offense, the young, youthful energy, everything about it. He was over his skis, and he had a very underwhelming coaching staff outside of Coach Evero on the defensive side and a couple other guys. They just were over their skis and swimming from jump. Russell Wilson had too much power. Pretty much anything that could have gone wrong did. It was a complete tire fire. The difference with Sean Payton, and I covered Mike Shanahan, is just the attention to detail in every facet, from special teams to red zone football to situational football. Camp will look different again. You're going to see 7-on-7 again. You're going to see more days in pads. It's more of that Bill Parcells approach. Payton is a protege of Bill Parcells. So what's different? It feels like just this juxtaposition from a young, energetic coach, first-timer who really didn't know what he was doing and thought the enthusiasm would get him through, to a guy who did it for essentially a decade and a half, who has a blueprint of how he's going to do it. And either you follow along or you get off the train, because he's not waiting for anybody. That includes Russell Wilson. So the difference will be in the discipline and the attention to detail.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about Russell Wilson. Obviously, that's kind of the central theme of this season after the catastrophic 2022 campaign for Russell. He played, at least statistically, and that's all we know in the fantasy football world. Statistically, he actually did play a lot better over the season's final month, excluding that Christmas Day massacre game against the Rams. But beyond that, I mean, more productive as a rusher, more productive downfield to Jerry Jeudy and others. Was there a glimmer of hope there late in the season that you think might be able to carry over into this season?
Yeah, once Jerry Rosburg took over, they went back to an offense that was more similar to what Russell ran in Seattle. Run-based offense, used the run to establish RPO, play action, bootlegs, deeper drop in the pocket so he can see downfield better. It was basically the Russell I had seen for a decade with the Seahawks. Frankly, those first 15 games or so, for much of it, they were running 3 wide, shotgun offense with backup offensive linemen, backup receivers. Russ just did not look comfortable at all. And they would go into the game with a game plan and then junk it by the middle of the first quarter with a bunch of guys who, were reserves. It was a mismatch, kind of an island of misfit toys. Rosburg takes over and says, we're just going to run the ball, establish the run, and then pass off that. So, yeah, it was encouraging, because not only did we see Russell get back to the moon balls and the deep strikes, but he ran with efficiency. Now, he's not only going to run probably 4 or 6 times a game, but even 4 for 32 yards or 6 for 40 yards, that's a big deal. As you guys, in fantasy league, that, but certainly it's a couple first downs a game. And so it was encouraging. Russell wanted Sean Payton as his coach. He's been humbled by last year. He's lost anywhere between 10 and 15 pounds. He's changed a little bit of how he does his offseason. He understands his legacy's at stake. I think he's a Hall of Famer already, but if he has another season like last season, that's a hard way to go out in your career, where you just go straight down. But if he has a good year, they go to the playoffs, even at 9-8, 10-7. does wonders for his legacy to show that last year was an outlier, because statistically last year was an outlier. The concern, Denny, would be if you look at his last 24 games from when he came back from the finger injury in Seattle, that's 31 picks, 31 touchdowns, 16 picks. Right. 2-to-1 is not the ratio we're looking for. You want somewhere between 3-to-1. And even in Sean Payton's last year in New Orleans, where they had basically a parade of quarterbacks, I think there were 29 touchdowns, 13 picks. Russell should be able to be, somewhere between 28, 31 and like 12 picks. Like if he should in this offense have a 3-to-1 touchdown to pick ratio, if he hasn't hit a regression that's going to go like this. So I'm optimistic, but like with everything with this team over the last 6-7 years, they got to prove it. They've had 6 straight losing seasons, 7 years without a playoff berth. They're just improvement mode. As much as you'd like to give Russell the benefit of the doubt, it was so bad last year. You just don't know exactly what you're going to get, other than you know there's going to be some improvement, but how much?
Sure. Yeah. Russell Wilson, obviously a later round pick for fantasy. I think that folks are hoping for a bounce back, not only for him, but for the team's pass catchers. We could shift quickly over to the Denver backfield, where there's a lot of fantasy interest and intrigue, and honestly some anxiety about Javonte Williams' knee issue. There have been, according to Sean Payton, he may or may not be ready for week 1. Javonte Williams seems bullish on his own health and his own progress. So even if Javonte Williams is fully back, is recovered, is ready to go, Troy, what kind of workload could we expect for Javonte going into the regular season?
Yeah, it's tough for fantasy league owners, because I think early in the season, Samaje Perine is going to carry the load, and I believe they're going to ease Javonte Williams back in to where October is where he could take over. So I could see Perine as the starter, Javonte Williams as the finisher this season. Because people don't realize it isn't until October he's a calendar year removed from ACL, PCL surgery, and other damage. And the history of running backs over the last decade who've had ACL surgery, that first year back, as fantasy league owners know, is not typically kind. You're looking at Jamal Charles, Adrian Peterson, maybe Dalvin Cook. I mean, it's a small number who've come back and had the level of performance or better. Usually that first year back's a bit of a grind. But I talked to Javonte a couple of weeks ago. He promised, when I come back, he's going to be that Batman running style, boom, pow, bang. Like he just runs with violent intentions. And he says that's the only way he knows. It's the only way he's going to be able to run. So I would expect them to ease him into it, Denny, to where if you're a fantasy league owner, don't bank on him getting, 18, 20 carries that first game. I believe he's going to be healthy, barring, something in camp, because he didn't start on the PUP list as he predicted. Right. But being ready for the opener and being a bell cow for the opener are two different things. So I wouldn't expect to see him start to get 15, 20 carries until the end of the first month / early October. That's just to be fair to the player. Now, I might see something different in training camp. With pads on, you might go, okay, he is ready. I'm just saying history tells us to be cautious. So Samaje Perine might be a sneaky pick for someone late to get early that first month of the season. Then he turns into a third down back the second half of the season.
Yeah, so that was my follow-up here was about Perine. Now, Sean Payton has had a lot of really nice things to say about Perine, who, was really good as Joe Mixon's replacement last year in Cincinnati. I think he showed enough to maybe be considered a 3-down back in the right situation. Is there any chance that Sean Payton and the Broncos see him as that if Javonte Williams is not ready to go for in the regular season?
Yeah, they obviously do. That's what Sean said. Now, again, he hasn't really done that since 2017. I mean, again, you'd be leaning and looking way back into history, maybe needing a telescope to find the last time he was an every down 3-dead. It doesn't mean he can't do it, just saying he hasn't. And the NFL, when it's been that kind of gap in between doing it, but you look at the body type, you look at, basically he hasn't had a lot of tread off the tire the last few years. There's no reason he can't. I don't know that he could do it over 17 games, but to start the season and see him get 15 carries at opening game, I wouldn't be surprised. They're going to run the football. Everything Sean Payton did this offseason with Ben Powers, Mike McGlinchey, bringing in a new line coach in Zach Strief, when you look at Sean Payton's last 5 years in New Orleans, they were top 10 in almost every rushing category, from attempts to yards per carry, red zone touchdowns. They're going to commit to the run to make Russell Wilson better in play action. So somebody's going to get those carries. And Pirine is the clear leader. They've got a couple young guys, Tyler Beatty, that might pop in camp, but I couldn't tell a fantasy league owner that without seeing camp, because we just haven't had any track record with these guys. But Pirine for a month, 5 weeks makes so much sense. And then Javonte again just starts to take over. The good news is Javonte was in a platoon role with Melvin Gordon for 2 years. So he's familiar with this, of how to, be effective with 12 carries, how to be effective. And both guys are 3-down backs. They both are really good in pass pro. So I like Pirine. I just, to see him do it over the course of a season, I don't know. But could he be like Latavius Murray was, for 5-6 games? Why not? Why not? He's built like that. He looks the part. He hasn't really been injured. Again, he hasn't done that role for a long time.
We like to say on this show that Samaje Perine has that dog in him, and I think that maybe you would agree if you see him on the practice field. Shifting over to the wide receiver group here in Denver, every coaching staff seems to love Tim Patrick. Everybody has great things to say about Tim Patrick. Last year, we had James Palmer saying Tim Patrick could be the leading wide receiver on this team. And then the next day, I believe it was, Tim Patrick went down with a season-ending injury. Where does this receiver room shake out for the Broncos behind Jerry Jeudy and behind Courtland Sutton? Or is Tim Patrick not behind those guys? Give us a lowdown on Tim Patrick.
Yeah, James was right, because last year Russell Wilson's favorite target was Tim Patrick. And unfortunately, he tears his ACL early August and he misses the entire year. This year, it's different. Jerry Jeudy's the guy. He proved it over the last 5-6 games of the season. He was one of the most productive receivers in the game over that last month. He's shown he could be a number one. And more than that, Denny, he grew into it. You could see his confidence inflate. Pat Surtain, his Alabama teammate, told me, Jerry just put his head down and just worked. Like, you could keep saying, I want the ball, but when you get it, make a difference. And he did. He was the number one. So for me, I project for Jeudy in this offense with between quick hitters and deep strikes, he should be at 1,200 yards and right around 7-8 touchdowns. That's who he is. And if you projected out what he did the last month of the season, he would be well over that. That's probably unfair, but there's no reason he can't be 1,200 and 7-8 scores. Then it goes to me to Tim Patrick, Mr. Reliable. He's as reliable as an old pickup. All he does is catch the football, and he makes big plays in the red zone. So if he's healthy, and again, his knee wasn't totally there yet in terms of his health in the offseason. You could see it wasn't that he was favoring it, but he wasn't explosive yet. So I want to see what it looks like in camp, because the first month could be a filling out process for him as well. But I don't see a reason he can't be 750 and 6 touchdowns. That's the key with Patrick, especially with fantasy league owners. He's not going to give you big yards consistently, but he is, in terms of a team that's been terrible offensively, he's one of the few guys that gets in the end zone. And that's the problem with Courtland Sutton. And people think I don't like Courtland Sutton. That's not true. It's just he's got 1 touchdown in like his last 26 games or 2. He just doesn't get in the end zone anymore. And he hasn't been the same since ACL surgery. He's been an NFL player and he's been serviceable, but he was a Pro Bowl before he blew out his knee. And so I don't know how Patrick and Sutton's receptions is one going to take over for the other, and that's how it's going to work. Or are they going to split? I don't know. And then you got to keep an eye on Callaway, who has ties to the Saints, and Brandon Johnson is my sleeper in that wide receiver group, because he was getting some first-team reps in the offseason. Again, what does that mean? I don't know, because they weren't in pads. But if you're talking about a sleeper of that group, Brandon Johnson is a guy I would keep an eye on if you're a fantasy league owner in the preseason to see where he's at, because he might jump one of those other 2 guys, where one of those other 2 guys becomes expendable. They tried to trade all 3 of them basically this offseason, save for Patrick coming off knee surgery, mainly to get draft picks, but also Payton was sending a message. He isn't particularly happy that they're paying their wide receiver room, I think, second most in the NFL, and they're not getting the production. So he likes them, but he doesn't love them. They were made available. They didn't make a move, so they stay with Jeudy. I think he's going to be the clear one. After that, it's going to be fascinating to me. And if I knew Patrick was healthy, I would tell you he's clearly the 2 for me. I just got to see the explosiveness come back. And until they get in pads, I can't answer that.
All right. Yeah. Well, we are in on Jerry Jeudy for sure. Last question here for you, Troy. Sean Payton seemed to not be too familiar with Greg Dulcich, the tight end rookie last year, at least when Payton first got to Denver. Since then, he's brought in Adam Troutman, who played for Sean Payton in New Orleans. Where does Greg Dulcich stand in this pass catching group? And, do you think that, we can project him in fantasy? Can we project him for an every down role, or is he more of a specialist here?
I think he's going to end up being one of the top 15 fantasy league tight ends this is why. Like, there was a little bit of a misconception that Payton didn't like him because he was asked at the owner meetings in March, what did you think of Greg Dulcich? And he's like, I couldn't even evaluate the film. That was a criticism of their just pathetic offense, not Dulcich. That was just like, I couldn't evaluate it because it was so bad and it was so, just discombobulated. I don't even know what I was looking at. What was he supposed to do? And so then you fast forward to the offseason, he's talking about Dulcich in a joker role that he used with Alvin Kamara, that he used with Darren Sproles. In other words, a mismatch guy in space that you just kind of figure out where you line him up. I'm not saying he's Jimmy Graham, but you can figure out where to line him up, and he's just got to be functional enough as a blocker so he's not a tail when he's in there. You can't every time he comes in, it's a pass play because this guy can't block. He's a willing blocker. So if he's functional, I think he'll end up in fantasy league guy as a guy who's going to be a top 50 tight end. There's not a lot of really good fantasy league tight ends, frankly.
That's true.
So can he catch 50 passes for 550, 600 yards and 5 scores? I think he can, because Sean Payton has in his mind how he can use him. He's one of the few players Payton talked about that way. Like, I see a vision for him. I have a vision for how he could work. Again, it's dependent on him being functional as a blocker. But Troutman, again, we could get into camp. Dulcich doesn't look good blocking at all. All of a sudden, Troutman's that guy. One of those tight ends is going to catch like 45, 50 passes, and it's made out for Dulcich to do it if he's functional in the running game.
Troy, we appreciate that clarification, because I remember that quote from Sean Payton, we couldn't evaluate the film, and I thought, that's not good for Dulcich. I didn't really know what it meant, but it didn't seem good. But if it was about Nathaniel Hackett's offense and kind of the dysfunction that defined it, I think that's a totally different ball game. Troy, thank you so much for joining us on the Rotoworld Football Show, for bringing some clarity to the backfield, giving us some hope for Russell Wilson. Good luck in training camp and throughout the season this year.
Yeah, it can't be worse. They averaged dead last in points. They will not do that under Sean Payton. I am confident of that. So it's going to be better in that regard alone.
All right. Thanks, Troy.
See ya.
Bye. All right, everybody. We're going to wrap it up. That was our AFC West rundown preview, some would say. We're going to be back on Thursday. Patrick Daugherty is looking very strongly into getting a better internet connection. We are going to all hope and pray that happens. In the meantime, thanks for joining us today. We hope you took away some really key points from the beat writers who joined us, and thank you for those guys, Pete and Troy, for joining us today. We'll see you on Thursday.